Okay, hopefully I won't need those. Allergy season. So, we started Isaiah chapter 40 last week. 2 weeks ago we reviewed the first section of Isaiah 1 through 39, to see the history of that, and what was the major dominant historical thing that was taking place in Isaiah 1 through 39. You better remember? War with who? Assyria. Right. Okay. So there was the Syro-Ephraimite war, and it was present. It was during the time of Isaiah's life, and we see. Going back through the historical books, First Chronicles, Second Chronicles, we see Isaiah, or Second Chronicles, we see Isaiah being referenced there in those stories, and he's there. He's present in the time of those things taking place. And then there's a break in the action at the end of Isaiah 39 and Isaiah 40 through 55. What is the dominant thing that's taking place historically?
Reestablish relationships with God.
Babylonian captivity, okay? But Isaiah dies long before Babylonian captivity happens. So do we have a problem with Isaiah writing the things of Isaiah 40 through 55? Well, not if we believe in God and that he can, know things ahead of time and predictive prophecy and that kind of thing. We really don't have any problem with that. With there being, passages that tell us things that are going to happen in the future. I mean, we kind of hang our hats on that, right? I mean, if God isn't able to tell us things that are going to happen in the future, why are we even here? Because there's some future things that I'm hoping for that God has promised me, and if He doesn't have those things already figured out, then we ought to just go fishing or something. But Isaiah is writing about things that are 100 years into the future, but that's okay because God knows those things that are going to take place, and predictive prophecy is a thing. So in the Bible, so we're okay with that. And then we'll see tonight kind of where the next break in the text comes, and we'll set up some things later for that. If we make it all the way through Isaiah 40 tonight, which I think we probably will, we'll do some kind of introductory stuff for next week to get ready for chapter 41. So just a quick review of where we've been. Our goal last week was that we would be able to state some of the reasons for studying the book of Isaiah, and I think we looked at those. The student will explain the broad historical background of the book of Isaiah. We kind of just did that. Good job, guys, that knew where we were with those things. And then the student will explain the role Isaiah 40 plays in describing the nature of God. And we talked about Isaiah 1 being kind of an introductory chapter to that those first 39 chapters where Isaiah talks about the nature of God, and he used those metaphors of God as a loving father and as Israel as a unfaithful son. We talked about God as a loving husband and Israel as an unfaithful wife, and then God as a physician and Israel as bad patients that don't do what their doctor tells them to do. So we set out the nature of God in that text last week, or in chapter 1 for that last section that we went through. And we're kind of in the midst of doing that for Isaiah chapter 40, is gonna lay out for us the nature of God as we move into how God's going to deal with his people while they are in Babylonian captivity. This was our Why Study Isaiah passage, our section last week, and we went through all of those last week. I'm not going to rehash those today, but over 100 quotes in the New Testament. The early Christians studied it. Jesus quoted from Isaiah. The gospel writers quoted from Isaiah. Paul quoted from Isaiah. So if Isaiah was important to all of them, then it should be important to us as well. We talked some about the Qumran scrolls, the Dead Sea Scrolls last week as well. The theme for this section is the nature of God and how he relates to his people. And we're unfolding that now as we go through the text of Isaiah 40. Just to put things in context with where things are at geographically, we have Jerusalem right here, And Babylon is all the way over here. And that doesn't look very far on that map, but it's pretty good distance in real life. So that's a small scale map. We looked at some historical background that showed that we are indeed dealing with Babylonian captivity, even though Isaiah is writing 100 years before that takes place. The three categories of people that were in Babylonian captivity were those who assimilated to the Babylonian rule, even going so far as to adopting the Babylonian gods and worshiping their deities. Others were in despair. They didn't see how they couldn't understand how things got to this point, and they didn't have any idea how they were going to get out of it. And that's just despair. And then there was those who were hopeful that put their trust in God and understood that God was going to be able to see them through the difficult times that they were in. So Isaiah was writing to all three of those groups, trying to draw them all into that final category of being hopeful. And outline of Isaiah, we've covered the first 11 verses, the three voices that speak in those first sections. And then we're just getting into 12 to 31, which was Isaiah's 3-point sermon about God. That's where we're talking about God's nature. So I'm going to kind of skip ahead a bit. As I will recall, we were ready for verse 18, I think, but I'm going to start right here and start reading in verse 12 to set up, because this is kind of that transition part into Isaiah's sermon. Who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand and marked off the heavens by the span and calculated the dust of the earth by the measure and weighed the mountains in a balance and the hills in a pair of scales? Who has directed the Spirit of the Lord, or as his counselor has informed him? With whom did he consult, and who gave him understanding, and who taught him in the path of justice, and taught him knowledge, and informed him of the way of understanding? Behold, the nations are like a drop from a bucket, and regarded as a speck of dust on the scales. Behold, he lifts up the islands like fine dust. Even Lebanon is not enough to burn, nor its beasts enough for a burnt offering. All the nations are as nothing before him. They are regarded by him as less than nothing and meaningless. So that first point of Isaiah's 3-point sermon was that God is incomprehensible. We can't fully comprehend God. And some of those metaphors that he used about he holds the waters in the palm of his hand. And, you know, if you think about how much you can hold in your hand, it's probably a teaspoon or two of water. But God, he can hold all of the waters of the oceans in his hand. And that's not, I mean, we can't comprehend that scale. We can't understand God's size. We can't understand his dimensions. And that's just a physical way of trying to represent really what is more important about God, not that God can manifest himself to be so physically large that he could hold the waters. I mean, that would be an awesome sight to see, but so what? I mean, if that's all he can do is be really big and hold the waters, so what? That stands as a metaphor for really the bigger things that God can do, which is providentially guide the direction of his nation, of the people, that he can work about through natural means to bring about the consequences and the results that he wants to see brought to fruition. And so God is incomprehensible, yes, in physical scale, but more importantly in spiritual scale and in what he is able to do behind the scenes, so that we can trust on his ability to bring about his desired results. So that's that first point. We kind of got through that last week. Now we're ready for this. Here we go. Verse 18 through 24 is Isaiah's the next section here. So it says, "To whom then will you liken God, or what likeness will you compare with him? As for the idol, a craftsman casts it, a goldsmith plates it with gold, and a silversmith fashions chains of silver. He who is too impoverished for such an offering selects a tree that does not rot. He seeks out for himself a skillful craftsman to prepare an idol that will not totter. Do you not know? Have you not heard? Has it not been declared to you from the beginning? Have you not understood from the foundations of the earth? It is he who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers. who stretches out the heavens like a curtain and spreads them out like a tent to dwell in. He it is who reduces rulers to nothing, who makes the judges of the earth meaningless. Scarcely have they been planted, scarcely have they been sown, scarcely has their stalk taken root in the earth, but he merely blows on them and they wither. The storm carries them away like stubble. And so, Isaiah's second point, his first point was that God is incomprehensible. His second one is that God is incomparable. How can we represent God with an image of any kind that does justice to who God really is?
We do our best.
We could try, but we can never succeed. So think about the Israelites at the foot of Mount Sinai when Moses was up at the top of Mount Sinai. What did they do? They made a golden calf, and they said, what? Behold, Israel, here is your God who delivered you from the Egyptians. Whoa, wait a minute. That golden thing that you just pulled out of the fire, that's not what delivered you from the Egyptians. And even if we give them kind of the benefit of the doubt or put the best spin on it that we could put on it and say, well, they know it wasn't that golden thing, but they're just using that golden image as a representation to be able to visualize something that they can't see, and they want to have something they can see that stands in place of something they know is there but they can't see. Even if we give it that spin, it's not okay. It's not enough. And so Isaiah goes through that process of thinking. Think about the craftsman who goes out into the forest and chops down a tree. And he takes that tree and he carves an idol out of it. Then he stands it up. And what's the first thing that happens? It falls over. And so he has to fix it so it doesn't fall over. The craftsman makes an idol and stands that idol up and then has to fix it and then has to say, this is my God. It's foolish. It's beyond foolish. It's incomprehensible how people can do that. But they did. And here Isaiah goes through this process of setting up the nature of God. Remember, what was one of the two big questions that the people had, especially those who were in despair? Do you remember what those questions were about God from last week?
Where is he?
Does he care? And can he do anything about it? Does he have the power to act? And does he even care? Well, I mean, that idol that you formed for yourself, that log of wood that you've carved, does it have the power to do anything? Can't even stand up on its own. Does it care? No, it doesn't. And so Isaiah is laying all these things out to demonstrate that Jehovah God, the true God, does have the power, that he does care, and that anything else that we can compare it to, there really is no comparison. So he uses the illustration there of like people are like grasshoppers in his sight. Imagine trying to describe God as like a grasshopper trying to describe man. What do you think a grasshopper thinks of you as you walk past it while it's sitting there on that blade of grass?
I doubt that it even
Yeah, I mean,
has a brain to think like that.
the ability of the grasshopper to try and explain a man is like a man trying to explain the intricacies of God. So in this illustration, I'm the grasshopper because I'm trying to explain God, but I can't. I mean, he's incomparable. There's nothing that we could really say that will do justice to any of his attributes or any of his characteristics. So no metaphor or example can do justice to God. He is incomparable. And so the verse that always gets me in this section, if we go back to the verses there, verse 21, do you not know? Have you not heard? Has it not been declared to you from the beginning? Have you not understood from the foundations of the earth? Now who is it that has understood anything from the foundations of the earth? I mean, only God can go back that far. Only God can understand even how the earth was founded and how it was established and how it is sustained. So, I mean, what is it that we're supposed to know here? What is it that we're supposed to hear? What is it that we're supposed to understand? God is incomparable. God is beyond our ability to fully understand. And so as we question where we are, which is what many of the Israelites are going to be doing in their setting, they're going to be in Babylonian captivity, and they're going to be questioning God's judgment. They're going to be questioning God's purpose. They're going to be questioning God's character, his nature, his power, his divinity. They're going to be questioning all of those things. But do they have the right to question those things? Greg?
Well, certainly those who experienced what Isaiah was talking about would be able to look back and be reassured that God is there and God is who he says he is. But these words speak to us as well, because there's a reference there that they wouldn't get. That while and this comes from Fishers of Men, the only reason I'm thinking, sits above the circle of the earth. It's not a book of science, but if it says something, it's right. They had no idea that the earth was round.
Right.
And that had to be a bit of inspiration there to show that these verses can be trusted.
Yeah, we can trust what it says about the orientation of the earth and how it works and all of those things, and here they get that right, or Isaiah got that right. So we have just this. It's a very poetic. It's very. I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, but it's very whatever it is about describing the intricacies of who God is.
Profound.
But it's very profound, which that's probably why I couldn't think of it, because I'm not. And so he is beyond what we can think to describe. And then here at this last section where he talks about the rulers, think about from the time that Isaiah is alive and Assyria is the dominant power, to the time that he's writing about when Babylon becomes the dominant power, to a time in the future that Isaiah is going to write about later where Persia is the dominant power. It's God who reduces rulers to nothing. These things are coming about as God brings them about, as God desires, as he sees fit. So God is not surprised by the change in rulers that are going to take place, that are going to end up bringing about his will. So that's that section. Isaiah 18 through 24, God is incomparable. Our last section then, 25 through 31. To whom then will you liken me, that I would be his equal, says the Holy One. Lift up your eyes on high and see who has created these stars, the one who leads forth their hosts by number. He calls them all by name. Because of the greatness of his might and the strength of his power, not one of them is missing. Why do you say, O Jacob, and assert, O Israel, my way is hidden from the Lord, and the justice due me escapes the notice of my God? Do you not know? Have you not heard? The everlasting God, the Lord, the creator of the ends of the earth, does not become weary or tired. His understanding is inscrutable. He gives strength to the weary, and to him who lacks might he increases power. Though youths grow weary and tired, and vigorous young men stumble badly, yet those who wait for the Lord will gain new strength. They will mount up with wings like eagles. They will run and not get tired. They will walk and not become weary. Our last section here, God is inexhaustible. God is inexhaustible. He does not grow weary. He does not get tired. And I'm trying not to mention somebody that has been working me like a dog these last couple of days who never seems to get tired. But I don't know. I don't know how that works. So, by the way, I told you Sunday to to ask a certain somebody who's present tonight if he got my water heater fixed or not. You go ahead and ask him that question later tonight.
I'm sure he did.
Well, he couldn't fix it, but we replaced it, so there you go. So God does not grow weary. Think about the metaphor that he gives, or the illustration that he gives to demonstrate the power of God as it relates to the stars. What does he say about about what God does with the stars?
Calls them all by name.
Yeah, he created the stars, and he led forth their host by number and calls them all by name. So how many is that? It's a whole bunch. It's a whole bunch. The latest numbers that scientists are estimating, there's something like 1 trillion galaxies out there, and each of those trillion galaxies has on average 400 or 500 billion stars. And God, he casts them forth. I mean, it's like, think of like the farmer as he casts the seed, and it kind of showers out and sprinkles on the ground. And so God cast forth the stars. And then not only that, but he set them all into motion, and he leads them forth. So in their movements, in the things that they're doing, he is the one that directs those, and he knows their names. I mean, we can't even imagine the number of galaxies and stars that there are, but not only the number of them, but he knows their names. We have other illustrations in the New Testament that Jesus gives in the Sermon on the Mount. He has the hairs on your head numbered. That's a smaller number for some of us, right, Johnny? Randy, sorry, I didn't mean to leave you out. Okay. But for some of us, that's a really big number. And he knows the bird doesn't fall to the ground without God taking note of it. A sparrow can't fall to the ground without God noticing that has happened. And so God, he has control of everything. He has control, and he doesn't get tired. I mean, I'm tired from working on a fence and mowing some yards today, and God can call all the numbers of the stars by name and lead them forth in their movements, and he doesn't get tired. That's inexhaustible. That's the God that we're dealing with. And so Isaiah lays all of this out here right at the very beginning of this section, as he's just beginning to talk to the people that are in captivity, that are in exile, they've lost everything. And they don't know what to do with that. They don't know how to process that. They don't know how to comprehend or deal with the fact that they have lost everything. And what do we do with a God that we thought we knew, that has allowed all of this to happen? And does it change what we think of that God, or who we understand that God to be? I mean, that's a big scale to think on, a national scale, where you have a group of people who are sort of thinking that way together. And maybe that is not what we're used to thinking in those terms, but on a personal level. Do we ever go through those types of experiences where everything in life seems to be going the way I think it should, and now something happens and everything is different? Does that change how I view God? Does that change what I understand God to do for me, or to be in my life? Because everything has changed. Teresa?
Maybe, I keep thinking about like when people go through like the natural disasters that we have, but also too, like you said, bringing it onto a personal level when there's something very personal that we're going through. Maybe it's a good idea for us to think more deeply about our relationship with God and who we are according to His will, and according to His standards. It's more for us than Him, because a situation can either drive us closer to Him or further away from Him, and that's our choice.
Sure. That's a good point. That and we even see that through the text of some of the things we've already looked at. That some people are sort of abandoning their understanding of God, and they're assimilating into that Babylonian culture, and they're others that are in despair and they're giving up.
You know, and over the years, we've seen people come and go a lot because of that,
Yeah.
I think, my opinion.
Yeah, I think you're right, and it kind of speaks to the illustration that Jesus used with the sower and the seeds, that that there are some, the seed takes root and it grows, and then the cares of this world come along and choke it out, and they lose their faith. They die in the faith because of the difficulties that they experience. And I think Isaiah is speaking to that here to let us know that it doesn't happen to God. God has not given up. God has not lost his ability to bring about his will. God has not stumbled in some way or forgotten about his people. He has not made a miscalculation or a misstep. God is still God. God is still doing what God does. God is still in control, even though things for us have changed in ways that we can't fathom, that we can't understand, that we can't comprehend. God is still in control.
Or maybe
And we have to start there.
Or maybe there's even something in our lives that comes to light, and we know we have to change it, but we don't want to. And it's all a part of our growing experience.
Yeah, and all of this is for the purpose of drawing. It's hard to imagine, but captivity itself, exile itself, is for the purpose of drawing his people closer to it. That's why he did it. Because everything else that he had tried to draw the people close to him before that failed. And so this was kind of the final straw. This was the final step that God had to be able to take to say, you're going to lose everything. You lose everything, and now we can start talking about how to rebuild it. And that's where the people are at. So, but it takes God's power, it takes his strength to be able to do that. We can't rebuild on our own. We couldn't hang on to it on our own. We had what we thought was perfect, and it's gone. And now I couldn't hang on to it, so I have to trust God to bring it back. Couple of discussion or thought questions for today. Exile and homecoming are major themes of Isaiah 40 to 55. In what ways do people experience exile today, and how can the message of Isaiah give hope to those who are in exile today? Does exile for us look like or mean the exact same thing as it meant or looked like for Isaiah in these chapters, where he's addressing specifically a group of people who are in physical captivity in a foreign land? I mean, is that kind of what we're expecting today if we're talking about exile?
I don't know, but I was thinking back to those two questions you said the Israelites were asking. Does God have the power to act, and does God care about us? And I think a lot of people have those questions.
I think that's exactly right. I think we can talk about spiritual exile. I think we can talk about people who are spiritually wandering, who are spiritually lost, who don't have a spiritual home. Isn't that what it means to be in exile? You're removed from your home. You're taken away from your home. And so there are people, I think, in that category spiritually, right here in this town, right here that we know, maybe in our own families, that are just lost, that are wandering, and they don't know if there's a God that cares. They don't know if there's a God that can see them through the difficult times they're going through, or that can help them with their spiritual existence, and may not even know that they're in exile. And so I think you're right. There is a spiritual quality to exile that we need to glean from this study, of not just thinking of things in physical terms, but thinking about the spiritual things as being preeminent. Tim?
We're kind of all in exile anyways, because this is not his kingdom. Therefore, it's not our kingdom where we are.
This world is not my home. I'm just a passing through. Our citizenship is in heaven, is the way Paul said that, I think, in Philippians. And so you're exactly right. I think there is a sense in which we are all, Peter wrote it as well, we are all strangers and aliens. And so that carries with it that sense of being in exile while we're here on earth, because we're waiting for something better. Good point. How did the exiles' misconceptions about the nature of God impact their time in exile? And how do modern misconceptions about God affect the way his message is received today?
They're the same.
A lot of similarities, I think, right?
Nothing new under the sun.
So the misconceptions about God, that he's not powerful enough to do anything about our situation, or that he doesn't care enough to do anything about our situation, drove them to those points of despair, or to those points of assimilating with the Babylonian beliefs. It was that misconception about God that led them in that direction. And I think we see people today with misconceptions about God that drive them to do some really weird things. There's some weird beliefs out there, and they're all. I mean, I'm not making fun of people who have those weird beliefs. I think they're searching for something, and they're not, for whatever reason, they haven't found it in God. They've missed it somehow. They've had a misconception about the nature of God, and so they've gone elsewhere. They found comfort, or they found meaning in something other than God. Okay. Well, it would be really awkward if I hadn't prepared anything to go on after Isaiah 40, because I didn't know how far we'd get. So here's for next week's slide. Read 41 to 42, and that's going to stay your assignment for next week. But we're going to go ahead and look at a couple of things to set that up. So as you read through Isaiah 41 and 42, here's some things to look for. And we're not going to I know we're not going to get into the text today because I don't have it on the slides. But I do have some stuff here for us to talk about by way of introduction. So the title of this one was Hallmark Cards and Jury Duty. All right. I don't have much use for either one of those. Our objectives in chapters 41 and 42. So as you're reading, look for these things. The student can share how Isaiah uses history to establish the existence and power of God. Is that a viable thing for us to be able to do, to look back at history to establish God's existence and power? I think Romans somewhere says the things written aforetime were written for our learning. And there's another passage in 1 Corinthians that talks about the example of those that have gone before. So absolutely, from a New Testament perspective, we absolutely look back in time to see the way that God behaves. As you're reading 41 and 42, look for this. The student can explain the sections of hope and reassurance and understand how they function in this section of Isaiah. So look for those themes of hope and reassurance. And then the final one here, not quite as happy, but the student can share that many exiles did not respond to God. Not everybody responds favorably to our message today even. So as we move forward in Isaiah, it's important to remember those categories of people that Isaiah is addressing. Those that have assimilated, those that are in despair, and those that are hopeful. And the goal is to take those who have assimilated and those who are in despair and bring them into that category of those who are hopeful. But once we have them into that category, we want to foster that hope. We want to give them information that they can build that hope on. So it's not a blind hope, it's not a false hope, it's not just a pie in the sky kind of thing, but here's the reasons that hope is a reasonable attitude for us to have, even in the midst of captivity. Part of what they wanted us to do as well as we got into chapter 41 and 42 was to review the fact that there are clear references that we're talking to the people in Babylonian captivity. A couple of these passages here mention Babylon specifically, and then a couple of them talk about the theme of restoration and restoration of the people, the exiles coming back out of captivity. So that leads us to the inescapable conclusion that Isaiah is addressing people who were in Babylonian captivity. So the theme of this section, 41 and 42, the God of hope and history sends a servant. This theme is the main thrust of this entire section, but it's really introduced here in these two chapters, Isaiah 41 and 42. And all of the elements of this theme are found in Isaiah 41 and 42. So we'll not look at those verses right now, because we'll get to those as we go through those chapters next week. But Isaiah 41, 1 through 7, and 21 through 29, Isaiah stresses how history verifies God's power in existence. How do you suppose it's going to do that? How can we look at history and verify God's power in existence?
Look at the battles he won.
What's that?
Looking at the battles that he won.
Okay, battles that he won. You can look back even in the earlier chapters of Isaiah 1 through 39, where that Assyrian army was camped out on the doorsteps of Jerusalem, knocking on the gate, and then 185,000 soldiers woke up dead one morning. And that is the sign of God's power.
Everything that the prophets predicted through God came true.
Okay, and that is, that even goes going back into the law when Moses was given the law to the people. That was one of the hallmarks that they were supposed to do. If a prophet speaks and what he says comes true, listen to him. If a prophet speaks and what he says doesn't come true, drag him outside the city and stone him. Right? So that's the hallmark of prophecy. And so you're exactly right. Looking back at all of the prophets and the messages they brought, established God's power and his foreknowledge and his existence. In chapter 41, verses 8 through 20, we'll see how Isaiah stresses how hope is found only in God. And again, it's obvious to us, the Wednesday night crowd. We're kind of on board with this type of thinking. That's why we're here. But put yourself in the position of those who are in Babylonian captivity, and you're in that despair camp. Well, despair is the opposite of hope, isn't it? And so here we're preaching to those who are in despair, and we're trying to demonstrate to them that hope is available, and it's only found in God. If you're going to stay away from God, then stay in your hopelessness, because that's all there is outside of God. But if you're looking for hope, there's only one place you can find it, and Isaiah is going to point them in the direction of God for the hope that God can offer. And then chapter 42, verses 1 through 9, God is announcing that he will send a servant. Ooh, that might be exciting. So we'll see where we go with that here in a week. And then some more historical things to consider for Isaiah as we read through this section. And this is just an interesting thing to make a note in the margin of your Bible, or go all the way back to Isaiah chapter 1 and kind of write this down on the title page of Isaiah or something like that, because I found this to be very helpful information to think about as I read through Isaiah and want to have the best discernment for what the text is saying. Then having the context of what Isaiah is writing is going to be really important. So there were 3 time frames or time periods that are addressed in Isaiah, and that first section, verses 1 through 39, deals with that time when Assyria was the dominant world power. And that's from 750 to 605 BC, so about 150 years that Assyria was the dominant world power. And Isaiah is alive during the first part of that. It's not even the later time that Isaiah 1 through 39 covers. It's really about 730 through about 705, I think is what it was. 704, it seems like, as we talked about some of those dates last week, or in the last chapter. So we have Isaiah alive during that first period when Assyria is the dominant power, and he's writing specifically to those people in 1 through 39 and helping them navigate those historical time periods. But now we're in Isaiah 40 through 55, and he's writing to people who were under Babylonian control. And Babylon was a world power from 605 to 539. So that really is just about 70 some years. Is my math right on that? Somebody check me. That's right, about 70 some years, right? And it was Babylon that that marched in and destroyed Assyria. It was Nebuchadnezzar's father who was the king at the destruction of Nineveh, the Assyrian capital. And then it was Nebuchadnezzar's father who first laid siege to Jerusalem, and then it was finally Nebuchadnezzar who destroyed the temple in Jerusalem. And so we have Babylon dominating the scene in a very, very powerful way, but only for about 70 years. And then they fall, and so Isaiah 40 through 55 is addressed to these people. And then Babylon falls, and Persia becomes the dominant power in 539. And Isaiah is going to name King Cyrus by name and say that Cyrus is the one who is going to allow the people to come back from captivity. And when the people take the scroll to Cyrus and they say, hey, look, we've been waiting for you because you've been named 150 years ago by our biggest prophet. He told us that you were coming and that when you got here, you were going to let us go back home. And Cyrus is like, okay, cool, let's do that. And so Cyrus authorizes that return, and Isaiah 56 through 66 is addressed to those people who come back as part of that return. So we'll see those three distinct time frames mentioned in Isaiah, and it helps us to interpret what Isaiah is saying when we understand that he's writing to three distinct different groups of people. Some things for us to think about. Those in exile have lost everything. We've talked about this already, but the two dominant questions that Isaiah has to address are: does God care, and can God act? And he goes through in the notes and lists about 10 or 12 things that he lists for us to think about. Under that, I just filled it in as those in exile lost everything. He listed out a bunch of things like their homes, their jobs, their livelihoods, their inheritances. Think about how big of a deal that was to the Jewish nation to pass on those inheritances down through their lineage. And they lost that. They lost their genealogies. They lost their geography. They lost the temple. They lost the living place, the headquarters of where God actually dwelt. And so they've lost everything. And that helps us understand then these questions, because we look at their situation from our side of it, and we know what's going to happen. But they were living it coming through the front side of it. They didn't know what was going to happen. And so for them to ask these questions, sometimes I'm kind of hard on them, and I'm kind of unforgiving about the fact that they're asking these questions. But if I was in their situation, maybe I'd be asking the same questions, because they're important questions to answer. Does God care, and can he act in the face of everything that we've done? So Isaiah's purpose is to provide a yes answer to both of these questions. So whenever we think about those two questions as we're reading through the section of Isaiah, how is Isaiah telling them yes? God cares. God is powerful.
It's okay to ask questions.
Absolutely.
But we need to, when we get the answer, even if it's not what we wanted, we need to accept it.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, when you think about the God that calls forth those stars by number and leads them all by name, do you think a question that I can ask him is going to stump him, or is going to make him uncomfortable? No, he can handle my questions, but they need to be asked with the right heart and the right attitude and the right humility to accept the answer that he gives, because he is the one in control. And then finally, as we get into this, we're going to get into some poetic sections of Isaiah. And I mean, come on, I don't like poetry. I got a C in English literature at Freed-Hardeman because Ann Woods is a really decent woman, and she just felt sorry for me. And I stayed after class a lot of days to try to figure out why, when Shakespeare says this, does he mean something else? It makes no sense. Okay, so me up here trying to explain poetry is going to be a hoot. All right, but some keys to understanding Isaiah's poetry. there are extended metaphors, things that show up kind of repeatedly. We're gonna see two different courtroom scenes just in 41 and 42. And so when we see those, we need to understand that Isaiah is using a metaphor to make a larger point, and there's not really a courtroom there. See? That's metaphor. It's not really a courtroom, but he's using it as an example for us to get a point. All right? He uses some vivid imagery, some word pictures to communicate points, and I hopefully we can find those and pick those out. He gave an illustration or example of one, I don't remember exactly where it was, but we'll see it next week. And don't get lost in the imagery or get caught up in the details of the imagery. Usually that vivid imagery is like big picture kind of thing. It's there for us to kind of see from an aerial view down on something, and if you try to make all of the little bits and pieces of the vivid image fit, it actually falls apart and it doesn't fit. But if you stay kind of back at a distance, then it becomes a better image for us to look at. And then just, to throw another layer of difficulty in, Isaiah doesn't always care where his pronouns point back to. He'll say, so I could say, Greg and Tim went out for coffee and he said that he was going fishing and he said that he was going hunting. So who's going fishing and who's going hunting? Greg and Tim were the two that went out, but I'm not sure which one's going fishing and which one's going hunting. So that we run into that sometimes in Isaiah, where we have to kind of make sense of it with the pronouns. And I don't think that'll probably be too big of a deal for us as we have our conversations here. But in your personal study, if you're getting lost in those things, you're not the first person to get lost in those, because it's hard in Isaiah sometimes. And my notes just ran out. So that's the introduction to Isaiah 41 and 42. We will jump in. We'll do a quick review of the introductory stuff for 41 and 42 next week, and then we will jump right into the text. Thank you.